The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 3 completed. Defeat of the Kingdom of Tame in the Northern Wars. It meant the decline of the kingdom and cost it the throne to King Dreed II, who was assassinated by his nephew General Amber. Upon being crowned, Amber took a different strategy. It boosted the iron trade with the kingdoms of the south and isolated the free lands of the north, who could only trade Tame in return of high taxes, which caused an increase in smuggling, enriching many inhabitants of Xeres. Fragments of the book, Origins of Smuggling in Xeres. Author, Klaus Afrin 4. Any mercenary who joined the Blue Phoenix Company had to pass a period of instruction. Such a famous mercenary company could not afford that any of its members were a warrior of a lower category than their clients expected. It was an expense that for the book eventually compensated, since they always had customers to whom to sell their services all over the world. Although Agnorok did not have the same opinion as his boss, he had been fighting all his life, so that now a clown would teach him how to wield a sword. In addition, most of his companions were idiots, elite mercenaries. Some gave too much to wine. However, he recognized that Debok was very intelligent. Most of his clients endorsed this well-uniformed trash bag and even filled his bag with gold coins. If the work was complicated, Debok did not send these mercenaries. There was a select group of mercenaries for these cases, although of course the price went up a lot. The half-orc was more engaged in these ramblings than in paying attention in the instruction classes in the handling of the lunge with the long sword. The situation, as everything, had some advantages. The first is that the food was quite good. The second, the climate in Almera was very pleasant. Now I understood the reason why many warriors decided to spend long periods in the city of mercenaries. As he was distracted, he received a blow to the right leg. It was well deserved for not paying attention. His rival began to laugh at him mockingly. Agnorok was carried away by anger and threw himself at his rival. It took 9 men to separate them when his rival already had his head broken by his repeated blows. The poor wretched ended up in the infirmary, and there he would be for a long time. It was the 4th fight in less than 10 days. Agnorok received a very serious threat from Debok: not one more fight. The next he would spend his entire contract cleaning the sewers of Almera of all the vermin that lived inside, so during a good season he would not see the sun. Well, after this serious warning, he was not to mess with those stupid lame troll children anymore. "What's wrong with you, young man?" A shrill and funny voice asked him a question with a serious air. Agnorok, absorbed in his angry thoughts, turned his head where the voice came. He met a small Denka, with large brown eyes of very bright colors and short gray hair. His ears were round and friendly. The Denka smoked a cigar with a carefree air while fiddling with a coin with his right hand. He wore the uniform of the Blue Phoenix Company. But he wasn't just any mercenary. He knew this from the embroidery of the Phoenix badge on the uniform that was different from his own, a silver color instead of the normal white color. He was one of the elite mercenaries. The half-orc acted suspiciously. He did not want to end up cleaning the sores of vermin. What a fucking shit. Care and caution went to hell, but old Denka didn't seem too upset at Agnorok's tone. The instruction, because you are right. Debok is fine with everyone having a homogeneous level, but it seems to me that it only serves to waste time in many cases. The good ones get bored and the bad ones don't improve enough and will end up being fodder for worms. The Denka, he showed the coin to the half-orc, was not exactly a coin. It was a flat blue stone that had a yellow spiral drawn in its center. He closed his hand, then opened it, and the coin was gone. A pretty cheap magic trick. The half-orc remained silent, watching the Denka. It was not very tall, about 1 meter 50 high. A little taller than the dwarfs. Although his body structure was robust, you had to be careful with the little Denka, it was not what it seemed. Indeed, you are right, you have to be careful with me. I speak, the Denka amused. Agnorok was amazed, he had read his thoughts. And? Nothing, don't worry, I like you. There aren't many white half-orcs in the world and we happen to have two now. Aris is royal blood, I am not. Well, nobody is perfect. Do you know that they have been looking for you for more than a year? Agnorok was silent for a moment. Yes, I have been told. You are the one who killed the king of the vampires. That was a long time ago, I was lucky. As far as I know, to take down the king of vampires took more than luck. Agnorok again fell silent. This Denka knew the king of vampires, but again his interlocutor smiled in an enigmatic way. You seem to know very well what that king was like. Well, I'm actually talking about what I've only been told. The Denka took a long drag on the cigar. Agnorok was intrigued to know who this colorful character was. Excuse your name? EE from Gosberg, but everyone calls me Gosberg. Gosberg is a name that sounds to me. Of course. It's that I'm famous, one of the best mercenaries in the Blue Phoenix Company. Agnorok lowered his head slightly, which provoked a laugh in the Denka. And that's how Agnorok met Gosberg, and it would be something the half-orc would not forget in his entire life. The heat was increasing in the environment, spring ended and this gave way to summer. 2 moon changes had passed since Arian had escaped from Caesarea. Her plan to escape north had yielded the expected result, since she found no one looking for her or following her trail. The trip became a very enriching experience for the young woman. To her surprise, she managed with great sufficiency to survive, thanks to the teachings received from Loth were tremendously useful. Finding food or looking for a safe haven at night became routine, and he discovered that they were tasks for which he had a natural instinct. He traveled along the path he had taken with Loth to the kingdom of the elves, reaching the Bantara Pass where he could see the great golden oaks that were his border. After she was skillful, she moved between the borders of the elf kingdom knowing that she would be safe there. He came to see the silhouettes of the famous Towers of Oblivion, imposing structures that were lost in the sky, but he did not approach although he felt like it was too dangerous. There could be white robes nearby, since after all it was the original destination of the magicians. Spring progressed, the days were longer and the mild weather favored their escape plans. Once she was more or less sure that she was not being persecuted, she headed south. Then she met the Nose Minute, a family of nomads from the north with whom she befriended when she helped cure one of her daughters of a serious illness. They considered her a healer and allowed her to integrate into their group. Her healing gifts made her highly prized among the family. He managed to adapt quickly to their customs. So anyone who saw her would consider her just another nomad of the free lands. Such was his rapport with them that they invited him to accompany them to the Northara, the sacred place of the Nose Minute, where they celebrated the festival of Orspear, which occurs during the shortest night of the year when the 2 moons cross. The nomads considered this date as their holiest day of the whole year. All the nomadic clans gather that night to worship their strange gods. At the end of the festival, the nomads take advantage of the beginning of summer to trade either with the coastal populations of the east or travel south, towards the kingdom of Beer. The Nose Minute agreed to help her, and with them she traveled without any incident, camouflaged among them until they reached the northern border of the kingdom of Beer, the city of Xeres. In this city a great commercial activity was concentrated, and at the beginning of the summer all was a melting pot of races and people. To enter the so-called Northern Gate you had to cross a wall built by King Dree II, after the failure of his attempt to invade the free lands of the north. Xeres was located in a flat and wide valley, between the Brown Mountains. It was the natural route of communication between the capital Tame and the free lands. Once the construction of his wall was finished, Xeres began to grow under his protection. Trade between the nomads of the north and inhabitants of the free cities of the coast with the inhabitants of the North Beer began to prosper. Then King Amber the Magnificent came to the throne, establishing a system of tariffs on trade with the north, creating in Xeres a customs house. It also established an entry tax on all foreigners from the north. They had to pay a gold coin for each individual who crossed the wall and the obligation to be registered their passage by the officials of the crown. The goal of the nose minute was to obtain that gold coin so that they could go to Xeres the following year. So either they obtained it by trading the previous year, or those who did not have the currency to pay customs had to trade with the free cities of the coast. Even some of the boldest nomads traded with the distant kingdoms of the west, but very few dared to cross the Great Desert. Xeres greeted her with the Great Dragon Gate, the only entrance to the city from the north. A crowd of people crowded in line. Since in the customs there was only one official surrounded by soldiers, but it was a simple process to give a gold coin, say the name, place of birth and declare the goods with which it was going to trade. Except the iron, everything was allowed. Arion did not raise any suspicion when he came to the dragon columns. He tried to imitate the accent of the nose minute and achieved it in an almost perfect way. The official did not raise his head and only wrote his fake name in the huge logbook. Once inside Xeres, they headed towards a large field where the nomads of the north settled, and that became a large market throughout the summer. Next door grew disorderly the city of Xeres with its stone buildings. The North Hara would be in Xeres for about 10 days, but Arion knew that to reach the southern ports this simple masquerade would not serve him. The nomads did not go so far south of the kingdom of Beer. After 10 days, in which they sold all their wares very well, Arion said goodbye to Noshmin's family who were returning to the northern forests. The young woman decided to stay in Xeres at least for the rest of the summer. In this city it was relatively safe and it was likely that some opportunity would arise to be able to travel south. Although the disguise was effective, Arion made the decision not to tempt fortune and rented a room in one of the numerous inns that existed in Xeres. He chose one of the most famous in the slums. It was called the Table of Ordoni. A huge building of about 4 floors, entirely built with wood, was not only an inn with some fame for those who came to visit Xeres, but also the tavern located on the first floor was well known for the quality of its beer and its famous black mushroom brandy. In addition to other activities not recommended for decent people. It was a place quite tolerant of nomads, which was not frequent in Xeres, and from what they told him about the inn clientele, it was a place where you could establish contacts with people who were not afraid of authority and who did not usually ask questions if the amount of gold was adequate. To find his chance to travel south, Arion used to frequent the tavern until midnight, when it was very crowded. Many of the tables were occupied by card players who either cursed their luck in the game or instead gave thanks to the gods, although professional players knew that the gods had little to do with the outcome in the cards. Others drank in silence located at the bar. Those who sat at the tables without playing talked in small groups of 3 or 4 people who from time to time cast suspicious glances at the rest of the premises, fearing that one of those present would spy on their plans. The only reality is that in Xeres everyone had illegal plans or businesses to declare, since King Amber banned the trade of maritime iron with the free lands of the north. Smuggling was a big business for the inhabitants of the city in the north of Beer. The king's taxes on trade caused many to consider smuggling with the northern lands as a very lucrative option, as profits almost doubled. This activity attracted to Xeres many fortune seekers but also the king's soldiers who pursued smuggling. The sentence was the death penalty. That was the reason why many of the tavern's patrons had quite a bit to hide. Nobody was interested in the royal guard passing through this place, and the truth is that not even the royal guard itself was interested. Arion had been staying at the tavern for more than a week waiting for an opportunity to travel south. Meanwhile, he was trying to discover news about the cities of the coast and the murder of a white-robed magician. But all he heard were the typical incidents of villages being isolated by snow during the winter or attacks by wolves and trolls. Even so, her situation began to be critical, since the gold was running out, and also her loneliness began to arouse the curiosity of many eyes, which wondered why such a young and attractive girl was alone in such an undesirable place. In order not to arouse more suspicion, he tried to go out as little as possible to the market. In addition, he had already sold all his wares and had gold to rent a room at least one more month. His room was located at the end of the corridor on the 3rd floor. It had a small window facing a small narrow alley where at night it was normal to hear noises, complaints and fights. The place was frequented by the worst kind of Ziris, but Ordoni, owner of the place, had very good contacts with the royal guard. As long as nothing serious happened and the bribes arrived in time, his inn and tavern would be a kind of oasis within Ziris. Everyone was happy, but Ordoni and his employees had to maintain some order because if the royal guard entered they would arrest any suspect despite the bribes. During the nights of that warm summer, Arian sat at a table in the tavern, the most hidden, next to the kitchen. The gloom of the place together with the heat coming from the kitchen made it an unattractive location for the clientele during the summer. But from there she could observe all the clientele clearly, almost always the same ones who frequented La Mesa de Ordoni. After 3 nights most of the faces were familiar, and even she already deduced her motivations inside the premises. Most were merchants, other card players or fortune seekers who approached this place in search of contacts for their possible future businesses that were most likely clandestine. The movement of people throughout the night was abundant, and many risked their lives for smuggling, especially iron. The inn was a nest of smugglers, prostitutes, merchants, mercenaries, thieves, tahas, corrupt royal guards and people with other secret goals like Arian. Malt beer was one of the attractions of the place. It was said the best of all Ziris, but also other liqueurs were famous as swan eye liqueur or black mushroom brandy. The amount of drink that was ingested was the fundamental difference. In a week in the local Ordoni understood that it was what made the difference. The professional players or the smugglers of the guild, as they were called in Ziris, only drank a drink or 2 all night, while those who were occasional customers or those who wanted to have a good time drank too much. The consequence of such recklessness was the loss of his money in the hands of the tahas. Arian had well-founded suspicions that Ordoni was in cahoots with professional gamblers and also with smugglers. The activity in the place could be summarized in closing a deal with one of the smugglers and to celebrate drinking a few beers, then investing the future profits in a game of cards where you lose a lot of what you won and end up looking for the services of some of the prostitutes that swarmed in the premises of Ordoni using the rooms on the 3rd floor. If at dawn the subject was prudent and had had some luck, he would have enough gold to return home. All these activities caused extra income to Ordoni. Of course, the women and boys who were engaged in prostitution had to pay him one of the 2 gold coins that cost his services. Ordoni became rich, especially in the summer where the activity was frenetic. Thanks to that gold, surely Ordoni could bribe the royal guard and surely the governor. The royal guard on duty did not approach the tavern. Security depended on Ordoni's thugs, who incidentally liked the tranquility in his premises. Not attracting attention was essential for the durability of his business. A scandal reached the ears of the king would be the end of these lucrative activities, since he would be sacrificed without compassion by the governor of Ziris. As it was evident, the presence of Arian began to arouse the curiosity of the customers of the local Ordoni. She was not a prostitute, so who was she? She could not stay there much longer. The last days she decided only to appear in the living room to only have dinner and then return to her room where she could spy on others without being seen while thinking about what to do with her uncertain future. Gosberg became a kind of protector of Agnorok within the company of mercenaries, so the half-orc found out he was someone who had a great influence on Debok, something he could not understand. However, Thanks to Gosberg's influence, Agnorek's instruction was made as short and light as possible. It was certainly a detail that Agnorek appreciated. His training improved significantly and he was finally able to show that he was well prepared, so Debok himself accepted that the half-orc was ready to enter the action. Their first mission would be with Gosberg. They were assigned to the protection of the king of Demember, who had to make a long journey to the kingdom of Bir. His Majesty wanted to seal a trade agreement so that he could obtain large quantities of his magnificent iron. At least nothing special was expected on the trip, a routine protection mission. The endowment of mercenaries would be the basic, Gosberg, Agnorek along with a dozen other mercenaries. The mission would last at least 4 months, which pleased the half-orc who needed to lose sight of Almera and his companions. A week later, Gosberg said goodbye to his son, a Denka of giant proportions named Zvodimir Sabu. Agnorek had not seen in years such an impressive being. In his youth he had seen the huge ogres of the snows and had also fought against some dragon. Both were immense beings, but Sabu was also giant and much faster. Gosberg's son would stay in Almera. The rest of the company was preparing for an important mission, but no one told the half-orc a word about that mission. It was a well-kept secret by Debok. The journey to Demember was pleasant and short. Everyone was relaxed and in a good mood, not expecting any danger. It was an easy job. They just had to stay out of trouble and return home with the company's reputation intact. Then they would charge a good sum of gold. The court of the king of Demember was like a fairy tale, full of luxury and princesses everywhere. The king was married to at least 50 women apart from having numerous concubines. A custom that surprised the half-orc, who thought that was getting into a lot of trouble. Agnorek could barely deal with a woman like holding half 100, at least on a first impression everyone seemed to be happy inside Demember's court, something surprising. However, the journey from Demember to the kingdom of Bir was another story, a real suffering. The excessive number of components of the royal entourage made the progress slow. There were days when there was hardly any progress. If His Highness did not feel like moving forward, they spent 3 days camped in the same place. The half-orc despaired, since he did not understand such parsimony, and he was beginning to be fed up with the whispering of some of the components of the king's entourage. Agnorek decided to join the advance scouts of the entourage despite having to ride horses. But he didn't want to get into any mess. With a death sentence a year he had enough. His Royal Highness was usually a kind person, but when something didn't go according to what His Majesty thought, he suffered terrible fits of anger. Fortunately for the whole entourage the journey went as planned, well with a little delay for the days of rest of the king. The problem arose when they arrived in Tame, the capital of the kingdom of Bir. The king began to suffer a series of terrible belly pains that none of the doctors who treated him were able to cure. Which was a misfortune for the couple of doctors since in a fit of anger of the king they lost their minds, so the monarch was left without anyone to supervise his health, which was a huge upheaval for the court. The Crown of Bir informed them that in Ziris on the northern border of the kingdom there was a doctor with great fame when it came to treating digestive diseases. Gosberg and Agnorek were sent to Ziris to hire the service of the famous doctor. Their fees were no problem and they had to bring him to Bir as soon as possible. Nobody knew that the king could happen if he lost his nerve definitively. The pair of mercenaries left at dawn. Neither of them liked to ride and they were walking. Agnorek had only agreed to travel on horseback with the explorers because he hated much more the whispers and rumors of the king's court. Anyway, they advanced fast. The roads of Bir were well conditioned and safe. Both were good walkers, so they advanced a great distance each day. They arrived in Ziris after a week's journey. Finding the famous doctor was easy. Convincing him to go with them to the capital was even easier since they had gold to spare for that. But the doctor did not want to travel at night at least the first day, so they decided that before sleeping it was best to go for a drink to celebrate the deal. And nothing better than the doctor's favorite tavern to make it, La Mesa de Ordoni, which was also an inn where travelers could rest. Arian knew that it was her last night in the place. Tomorrow, although she had paid in advance 1 more week, she would disappear. She did not know what to do. Surely she would play everything for the whole and leave alone to the south, which was dangerous. The young woman was immersed lamenting her fateful fate when she observed that a most striking trio entered, without a doubt. One of them knew him by sight. He was a frequent customer of the place, a middle-aged man with elegant clothes who was also treated with great respect by all the other customers who frequented the place. That he loved to play cards, always betting large sums of gold, and to his surprise the Tahors let him win sometimes. The other 2 members of the trio were new to the place, or at least did not come since she was staying. They looked like foreigners by their clothes, an elegant light blue uniform with a darker blue phoenix and embroidered with gold thread. They carried weapons and backpacks that made the young woman suppose that they had recently arrived in Xeres. One of the 2 strangers was quite tall, corpulent, black manner, sporting a beard of the same color as his hair but unkempt, piercing black eyes. Attractive, thought Arian. The young man, after talking to his other 2 companions, stayed at the bar and ordered a beer. Then there was the other member of the group. Arian had heard of them, but had never seen one of them live, a Denka. It took some disappointment to be bear-like beings expecting something much bigger. However, the Denka he observed was small and robust. That if he had a cheerful and jovial expression, he talked animatedly with the middle-aged man. In the end, they both decided to go play cards and sat at one of the best tables in the tavern. All the players who were experts in card games hardly tasted the drinks, but not the Denka, that since he took a seat he did not stop drinking beer and other liquors in a huge way. He was certainly not a professional. He also invited all his fellow partisans to a round. As he perished, he had no qualms about spending a large amount of gold tonight. The best players began to be interested in that table, and some were added while the most prudent decided to leave it. Really, in the end, the worst of the clientele of Ordoni was gathered. All of them had participated in the few fights that were in the place during the stay of the young woman. The Denka was confident and always invited anyone who joined the game table to a drink. There was laughter and many jokes at that table, but they were not most sincere, gave the impression that the Denka was a pigeon entering a trap full of snakes. Arian noticed the other companion of the Denka again, was quite bored and did not pay much attention to the game, took 1 more mug of beer and leaned on the bar. The young woman decided to go up to the room, and on her way to the stairs she passed by the young man, so she could examine him more closely. She could not explain it, but there was something special inside him. The young man raised his head and his 2 black eyes were fixed on Arian. She stopped for an instant but lowered her head as she passed by him to show feigned indifference. The young man did not pay attention to Arian and concentrated again on the card game in which his companions participated. Arian arrived at his room, the most economical of the posed to be next to the tavern and the alley. It was too noisy for a proper rest, but had a privileged position to spy on what was happening in the living room, because one of the planks of the floor was loose and giving it a little. A slit opened from which the whole room could be seen. The card game progressed well into the night, with only 4 players remaining, the middle-aged knight, 2 Tahors of the worst fame, and the Denka. The others had either retired to their chambers or slept on their chairs. The game was about to be decided. Arian could hear perfectly what the players were talking about thanks to the silence that reigned inside the premises. "Well, Matasanos, I think your luck is over." The Denka's shrill and cheerful voice was unmistakable. "I disagree, Mr. Gosberg. Before attending to your lord, I think I will leave you without your gold." It was a more serene and calm voice. "I hope not." The Denka showed confidence in his tone of voice apart from having a good drunkenness. It was the decisive moment. The 4 players showed the cards. 2 elven kings. 3 black dragons. 4 stars of fire. The middle-aged man spoke with the satisfaction of one who knows he is the winner of the game. But the Denka with a smile grabbed his companion's hand to prevent him from taking the boat from the table. Quiet, doctor, 5 stone centaurs, won the game. The other 3 players were stunned to see how the little Denka laughed and jumped while he began to collect the dividends, but in one of his pirouettes, the Denka fell on his back and from his right sleeve 4 other stone centaurs flew to the ground, just in front of the other 3 players, astonished by the discovery of the traps of the Denka, especially since he wore a short sleeve. Cheat! Stupid Denka! You will see what we do here to your ilk. The other 3 players were very enraged. If anything they hated in Xeres were the cheaters who proved to be better than the locals. The traps to the cards were punishable by death, it was a law of the streets of Xeres. The 3 players affected by the traps of the Denka grabbed him and took him out of the premises. The quartet went to the dark alley, where he gave the window of Arian's room and where most of the fights of the place ended. Arian was lucky he could follow the misadventures of the Denka. He stuck his head out a little to observe how the 4 players resolved their differences for the final result of the game. The 2 strongest, who were the Tahas, grabbed the little Denka by the arms while the former companion of the Denka stabbed him in the middle of the abdomen, thus used to die the tricksters outsiders who won in this city. Agnorok was bored, and although it was only the 3rd beer he started to be drunk. Something strange, but it was the first time he tasted Xeres beer. Maybe it was stronger than all the others. His vision was clouded, he lowered his head for a moment and when he picked it up again, he watched as a young woman stared at him. The girl smiled slightly until she realized that he had noticed her gaze, but that eye contact was interrupted by a huge scream from Gosberg accompanied by a squeaky smile. After another beer he began to fall asleep. He could not help it, his vision was clouded and he noticed how the girl passed by him, but he could not react since he later fell asleep. When the half-orc woke up he only got to see how they took Gosberg out of the tavern and they did not seem very happy. The truth, it was difficult for him to get up and follow his companions out of the premises. Gosberg was bleeding profusely from the wound. The young woman expected to see the Denka agonize over his bad head, but that is not what happened. As soon as he was stabbed, the Denka rested his legs on his attacker's chest and threw him to the bottom of the alley where his back hit the wall hard. Then with great skill, he got rid of his 2 oppressors by means of a pirouette backwards, which left the 2 opponents astonished, and taking advantage of the break of his 2 rivals, the Denka took a dagger that he had hidden in one of his boots and threw it towards one of them. The gesture was incredibly fast, so much so that Arian herself doubted if she had seen it, but the truth is that one of the Tahas was dead instantly. The other Taha saw his dead companion on the ground and seemed to take more sincerity to the Denka, drew a short sword and slowly advanced towards his rival. At last he decided to attack the Denka, with a lunge towards the heart, but the Denka dodged it with great ease, taking advantage to place himself on the back of the Taha. With another quick gesture he took out another dagger and stuck it in the back of his neck, killing his rival on the spot. This crime caused the Denka to be back at the mercy of his former party partner, who was already recovered from his previous blow, armed with a kind of knife. When he was about to attack, the Denka appeared unexpectedly. The other component of the trio, the young man with black hair who with a skillful lunge in the side, ended the life of his former partner. He could only utter a faint moan to fall to the ground and agonize, spasming, until finally stopping. The fight had not lasted a minute. Arian was impressed, and of course that crazy couple were in a good predicament. Gosberg knew that the wound was quite deep, and the amount of blood coming out of his body was getting bigger and bigger. It was too much. The Denka lost consciousness, falling round to the ground. Agnorok didn't know what to do. They were in a mess. They had killed the only doctor who could cure the king, and the Gosberg idiot was mortally wounded. If they did not end up in Xeres on the gallows, the king would behead them when they failed in their mission, and if by a miracle they saved their heads, their destiny would be to clean the sores of Almera of vermin. So was the half-orc, evaluating the few options he had to survive when someone touched him from behind. Agnorak almost decapitated her with an instinctive gesture but stopped the lunge in time. It was the girl in the tavern. The girl did not speak. With a rag she made an emergency bandage to Gosberg. Then with his eyes and a sign, he ordered the half-orc to lift up the dying Denka. The young woman got up and returned to the inn, followed by the half-orc carrying the wounded Denka. Arian's room was nearby and they made as little noise as possible. The half-orc without saying a word left Arian alone with the Denka for a moment. The young woman thought what the hell she was doing. She was helping two murderers, but the truth is that she had followed her instinct. She had no time for regrets now. The wound was deadly. The first thing was to contain the bleeding. At least it was a clean wound, a miracle. I did not know much about the anatomy of the Denkis, but there was no damaged organ. It was impossible. But it was not the time to think. So he did what he knew best: cure. With a little linen thread and an ivory needle made with a tusk of a sea mountain, I managed to make a good suture. Then I had saved dried leaves of mantissa. He moistened them with a little water and made a paste that he applied to the wound. At the end of the operation, the half-orc was already back in the room. He had brought the 2 bags that he and the Denka were carrying. Arian told him that he will incorporate the Denka and made a good bandage. At least the wound had stopped bleeding. Agnorak knew how to make a living. Making the right and quick decisions was essential. The first thing was to get things back, so he took a chance and left Gosberg with the young woman alone and went for her backpacks. There was no one, all desert. Lucky. He hid the corpses so that they were not discovered with the naked eye, but he could not do anything to clean the blood. He only tried that the trace of blood did not take them to Arian's room. They would gain some time which they did not have. It will get fine. You just have to rest a little. Arian spoke to the young man once the situation was stabilized. We don't have much time, but thank you very much. I didn't know what to do. Thank you. You're in a good mess, you know. Agnorak sat on the floor. His head still had a bottle because of that beer. The girl's accent was strange. She pronounced the vowels very nasally and it was difficult for her in her current state to understand her. He tried to be nicer than usual. You don't know it well. Sorry, what's your name? Arian. I am Agnorak and you can call the wounded Gosberg. The young woman looked at the Denka who slept with a face of absolute placidity, something strange for the wound she suffered. A Denka. That Denka just my life. In short, nothing can be done, we have to rest a little. Agnorak took a seat on the ground near the entrance and closed his eyes. Arian was surprised by the calmness of these 2 hustlers could betray them and call the guard. How? Silly, if she had just saved them. She also improvised a bed with a blanket and decided to try to get some sleep. The alley of Ordoni's place was a place where blood and scoring were very frequent, something that Arian had not noticed during his stay. So a few more traces of blood would not surprise anyone. Also at that time no one was in a position to ask anything. It was an area little frequented by the royal guard. At the moment they were lucky. Their crime would go unnoticed for a few hours. When Arian woke up it was already dawn. Agnorak was not in the room. She went to inspect how her patient was sleeping peacefully. The bandage had no trace of blood. That wasn't possible. The wound was so deep. Where am I? Arian slapped. Gosberg opened his eyes. His voice showed only drowsiness but no pain or worry. In my room. You should not cheat when you play cards in these places. It is punishable by death. The young woman was bothered by the carefree tone of the Denka, or was either unconscious or her memory failed. I wasn't the only one cheating, I just did it better than them. Anyway, now they will have other worries. The Denka looked at the young woman again, but in his gaze there was only curiosity about his unknown benefactor. It took a while until he noticed the bandage on the abdomen, and to the surprise of the young woman he took it off. I was totally scarred. Hey, what a good job, it usually takes a week to close, look only a couple of hours and like new. He carefully put the bandage back on without showing any sign of pain. It was impossible, impossible. She had sutured the wound herself. It would take a month hopefully, but only 3 hours had passed. Arian had to sit up on the bed. This was beyond him. The Denka was incorporated by doing a series of rather curious stretches. For the gods, it's impossible, muttered Arian. Gosberg reached for his t-shirt, but it was torn and full of blood, so he saw his backpack and started looking for something. Thanks to you, you owe this recovery so fast. You have a great talent. Arian was still perplexed. Gosberg put on another shirt. The pants had blood stains but did not seem to give it importance. Do you have a healer name? Arian. The little Denka lit a cigarette and lay back on the bed. Delighted, my name is E. of Gosberg, but you can call me Gosberg. I understand that you haven't seen many of mine. We tend to be infrequent in these cold lands. I am a Denka. Mercenary of the great company of the Blue Phoenix, now in the service of King Dasmir Ilanabad, Lord and Protector of the great kingdom of Demember. Gosberg bowed faintly with his gaze. Agnorak entered the room and cast a furious glance at the Denka, then came to him running. Gosberg! You are an evil born! Agnorak had to contain his rage. Luckily, so far no one has noticed anything. It's a miracle. The Denka took a puff on the carefree cigar again. The two young men looked at each other. Was Gosberg well in the head? Was this attitude a sequel to the injuries? Were cigars special? Arian tried to reason with the Denka. Gosberg, do you know what mess you've gotten yourself into? The Denka watched his companions in disbelief, then scratched his head, seeming to try to remember what happened the night before. We closed the deal with the doctor. To celebrate, we played a game of cards. It's all confused in my head. I think I won and ended up injured during the celebration, surely. Gosberg was satisfied with the explanation, took off the t-shirt he just put on, and finally lay back on the bed. He hoped that the two young men would let him sleep what was left of his drunkenness. But her plans failed since Arian threw a jug of water on her head. She was fed up with Gosberg's indolence. This action of the young woman provoked the laughter of Agnorak. It's okay to wash for once. I jerked the half-orc. Now the Denka had a furious look, but the young woman confronted him before Gosberg reacted. Sorry, but it wasn't exactly like that. You did play cards and won, but your matchmates discovered that you had cheated and tried to finish you off in the alley, and you killed all three. All three? Gosberg was a little astonished by this news. The doctor also. A man with grey hair. To tell the truth, that one was killed by your friend. Arian pointed to the half-orc. Agnorak under the head, while the young woman shook hers. There was nowhere to take them. Now that's a big setback. We needed the doctor. Doctor? Yes, His Royal Highness needed an expert to treat his terrible tummy aches. It was our mission in Xeres. If the king is such a great monarch, he will surely have more doctors. I had them. What happened to them? They lost their minds prematurely. Arian was scared. She didn't understand anything. In one night she had seen what life was worth in Xeres, nothing, while the Denka tried to reassure her. Yes, the head, they could not cure the belly pain of the monarch. The king, when he is in a bad mood, is not very permissive with inefficiency. Your king is crazy. Just normal. I did not think that a simple trap to give some spark to the game had such terrible consequences. Agnorak sighed. How would they explain this to Debok? It was crazy. What are you going to do now? Asked Arian. The truth is that they were in a good mess. If we return without the doctor, we will most likely lose our minds. The three of them fell silent, while the Denka wiggled his abdomen rhythmically. It looked funny. This wound has turned out very well. Are you a healer? You're crazy, Gosberg. Agnorak tried to restrain himself. Well, I know something about healing, but I'm not going to help you. The idea of Denka was so mad that it caused rejection in the two young men, although each had different motives. Do you know any remedy against bellyaches? Occasionally, but Gosberg, I'm not going to go with you to have my head cut off. Arian's main rejection was that although the company of the two mercenaries guaranteed him some protection by Tame, his destiny was to try to cure a mad king. Come on, I won't cut off your head. Only if you fail. But seeing how you have cured me, there will be no problem. Gosberg's words were of absolute confidence in her. Not to mention, you are crazy. I don't want to risk my life. I hope you leave this room at nightfall. I have already risked enough today. Arian was horror of the nonsense of the Denka. Gosberg seemed to give up as he closed his eyes and lay back on the bed. Agnorak sat on the ground and began to mutter curses. The young woman began to think about what excuse she would give Ordoni to explain the blood or the tearing of her sheets. The tone of voice of the Denka changed. It was the same voice, but it was not the same. There was something totally different in it. It emanated an authority that made the two young men astonished. Agnorak had never heard that tone in Gosberg. What was that damn Denka up to, thought the half-orc. We can provide you with a comfortable and easy escape. That is if he continued lying in bed without opening his eyes. What are you saying? Only if you accompany us your escape will be easier. Your position here is desperate. Soon the nomads of the north will return to their homes and you will be alone, surrounded by smugglers and other ilk who would sell her mother for 2 gold coins. Run away, me. What nonsense. Blood loss is affecting your head. You think people are idiots. Everyone thought you were a prostitute, but you were not looking for customers, so what are you? Thank goodness that the rumor that ran through the tavern said that you were a witch of the nomads of the north that has saved your life so far. If it were not for that, you would not be sitting here. Hearsay. Arian was worried. The half-orc raised an eyebrow. How the hell did Gosberg know about those rumors? For the gods. They hadn't been in Xeres for a day. That's if Arian started to be nervous and insecure for the first time. A witch from the north. Other drunks said you were a rebellious princess, and the less but more sensible said you were a fugitive accused of witchcraft or other less interesting things like adultery, or that you have an unwanted pregnancy. Imagination is free when coupled with liquor. A witch, incredible. It was a great luck. You are alive for that very reason. In Xeres, they are very superstitious with witches. Killing them gives bad luck, or so they think, so they try not to anger them. If not, at least, you would have been robbed the first night, or perhaps Ordoni would have reported to the guard. But the fact that you dared to come alone to this place and be so mysterious made them think that you were a very powerful witch, and no one wants to suffer a curse that all their descendants drag. Arian was touched. She was alive by the superstition of bandits. Just for that. But he was tempting fate. Here is famous the legend of a witch who seduced young people and transformed them into goats and then cooked them. Although in the south some witches do not need to transform them to eat them. Gosberg already had the usual tone of voice, squeaky and jovial. You could not notice that power that emanated in his previous words. Gosberg, I think I have more options than you say. It's not such a desperate situation. Gosberg opened his eyes and stared at Arian. Do not tempt luck. Some were already beginning to doubt your powers. One of my companions commented that he was very tempted to pay you a visit one of these nights. Agnorak smiled. Of course the Denka is able to throw a good lantern, and also his source was dead to deny him. Also, if you are not running away. Why do you have your luggage made and ready to start the march? You yourself were realizing that the situation here was untenable. You're making it all up for me to decide to join you because you can't go back to the king without anyone. My beautiful damsel, I will not deny that I am interested in your company because our current situation does not have a good prognosis, but recognize that I offer you a viable way out to leave Xeres and travel south. Besides, we're not going to ask you anything about your murky past. The situation was clear to Arian. The mercenaries had a travel plan to reach the capital of Beer. She had nothing, not a map. If he didn't accept, he would have to improvise. Arian sighed. I just have to cure a tummy ache and then I will be free. If only that, but if you succeed and gain the trust of the king, sure that you stay under his protection and no one can catch you. We'll see. Finally, Gosberg agrees to go with you on the condition that Xeres' exit plan convinces me. If I see that you are as unconscious as in the tavern, I will leave you immediately. Well, one thing, the king must be able to dine on lamb, which is his favorite dish. Arian was about to grab her backpacks and run away, but she remained silent, looking at the Denka with displeasure. Agnorok was surprised. The damn Denka had gotten away with it. No wonder the boat held him in such high esteem that he was able to sell boots to a snake if he put his mind to it. Gosberg sat up on the bed and stared at the young woman, who was upset. What? Go downstairs and look for that fat Ordoni. Tell him anything to move his ass to this room. Arian was surprised. She didn't like orders. Let's go. Gosberg hastened her. Reluctantly, Arian left the room, slamming the door. Now the two mercenaries were left alone. Gosberg, you're crazy. The Boke will insert us into a spear for all this, and the king cuts off our heads. Quiet, Agnorok, we can only be killed once. The half-orc put his hands to his head. Snow ogres who eat their own feces are more sensible. We are mercenaries in the service of a king plunged into madness, and we have killed our only solution. You have killed. Agnorok looked with a certain hatred to the Denka and then moved on. And then you entrust our destiny to a young woman who we do not know where she came from and who she is. You killed the doctor and you accepted his help to cure me without knowing her at all. And the crazy one is me. When I had the situation under control. Controlled. Middle of this discussion, the door opened and Ordoni came in, who seemed to suffer from a good hangover, and then Arian with a serious countenance. Agnorok closed the door quickly and stood in front of it, preventing any exit with his body. Gosberg approved the half-orc's action. The young woman had a hard time waking Ordoni, who was sleeping on the kitchen table. The young woman told him a story about the window being broken, and the innkeeper agreed to go upstairs, probably because he was still asleep. When he entered and saw Gosberg lying on the bed, Ordoni turned pale. Good morning, Master Ordoni. Gosberg smiled broadly. Ordoni tried to escape, but as Agnorok was blocking the door, she tried to regain her composure. Arian was surprised. She didn't understand anything. Good morning, Lord Gosberg. I see you're glad to see me. By the way, you were very sharp when it came to organizing the card game. I had to do a lot more cheating than my rivals to win. Lord Gosberg, we hadn't seen each other for years. By the way, how do I end the game? Agnorok thought that Gosberg knew too many places, too many people. It seemed that he had lived 1,000 years. I have to inform you that your 3 good clients have suffered a fatal accident, and the death of one of them is a great setback to my business. The 3 dead. Ordoni was much paler. Of course it was somewhat excessive, but someone insisted on putting unicorn oil in my drinks and probably also in those of my partner. Agnorok got angry. Unicorn oil, that explained the bottling of his head and the great drowsiness with only 2 beers. He was drugged by Ordoni. To know how many customers who play cards he does this to, so that they bet all their gold and lose against their cronies. Of course you, Ordoni, are completely innocent. Ordoni panicked, tried again to leave, but Agnorok prevented him, and with a push the innkeeper returned to stand in front of the Denka. Lord Gosberg, they forced me. They knew of their fame when playing cards and wanted some advantage. I tried to warn them, but I was threatened by those bandits. Ordoni, you lie very badly, you are the ringleader of this conspiracy. But let's get practical. Yes, whatever the Lord commands. The innkeeper accompanied such docile words with a long bow. This astonished the two young men. First, as I understand the 3 bodies are still in the alley, I want them to disappear for at least a week. But the doctor is well known, people will ask for him. Say that he went south, his services were claimed by a great king who has offered him an enormous amount of gold. Whatever you order will be done. That's how I like it, without question. After that I want you to buy a mule and provisions for a week's travel. Yes, sir. You make me happy the morning, Ordoni. I have to come more times to your place. Wait, there are more things. Ordoni had begun to back away from the room but was paralyzed by Gosberg's words. Do not leave, I need your services for one more thing. I want to use the shadow passage to leave the city without being seen. But I can't get that, my lord. The Smugglers Guild will not consent to it. That Ordoni attitude is unproductive and disappoints me. Gold is no problem. Ordoni was very upset while the Denka was quietly lying on the bed. But I don't want excuses, I want to leave as soon as night falls, so you have a lot of work to do. Lord Gosberg, what you ask of me is impossible. What is impossible is that you live tomorrow if you do not do what I have asked you to do. Take this bag of gold for expenses, don't let me down. Gosberg threw him a leather bag that Ordoni picked up fearfully. Agnorok moved away, leaving the door free. The innkeeper, seeing his free escape, quickly disappeared. Now the 3 of them were alone again, and Gosberg covered himself with a blanket. He seemed willing to get some sleep. Arian was stunned by what she had just seen. All fixed, compliant. Yes, everything fixed. Arian blurted out the phrase sarcastically, but Gosberg didn't seem to be affected and settled his pillow. It's crazy. How can you trust someone who has poisoned our drink? The half-orc also doubted the plan of the Denka. Relax, rest, it will not betray us. How are you so sure? Gosberg uttered a lament. The doubts of his 2 companions prevented him from resting. He looked at both of them reluctantly. Trust me, I am as interested as you are in leaving this city. He can betray us. Arian insisted. It has some conditions that will make it very loyal to us. Which? Insisted the young woman again. Through the window a mosquito entered. At this time of the morning they were looking for some shade to escape the sun and incidentally find some victim. Gosberg opened his eyes for a moment. His huge pupils dilated and then closed. With one finger he pointed at the mosquito. The 2 young men noticed his flight until it landed on a wall. Lightning, that was. Arian had never seen anything like it, and neither had Agnorok, who was an expert warrior. Arian shouted in amazement. At the second was a dagger stuck in the wall. The 2 young men approached. The mosquito was split in half. The 2 looked at each other incredulously. The half-orc with some difficulty removed the dagger from the wall, and both examined it. It was very small, it did not reach 10 centimeters, but very sharp, matte black iron, weighed about 5 grams. You had to have an extraordinary strength to launch it at that speed. It was impossible, it looked like magic. The 2 turned their heads. Gosberg snored placidly on the bed, and the 2 looked at each other's eyes and wondered who the ***** was. The little Denka. Immediately Ordoni and his men cleaned the alley with haste. Inside a cart full of manure they hid the corpses. Both Arian and Agnorok observed the whole maneuver thanks to the window of the room. They also saw how Ordoni and his men stole everything they could from the belongings of the 3 dead. The 2 young men and Karma decided to rest a little. The trip would be long. The Denka and the half-orc were fast asleep, so for a while the young woman could study them carefully. Gosberg stood out for her short silver-grey hair, a snout and hands that had fingers that hid, as it was said, the most terrifying of the Denkis, huge claws capable of destroying almost anything. From what was said of them, they were cheerful and sociable beings, but quite anarchic, so they rarely used to be used as soldiers, caused many problems of indiscipline, and as slaves. The Denkis used to prefer death rather than the loss of freedom. That was what he missed about Gosberg, who was a mercenary and to be Denka behaved acceptably but surely hid something under that appearance. Ordoni knew it or suspected it, that's why he was so intimidated by him. The young man was not human, or not at all. Now that I examined him closely I could see unusual things in him, such as the cheekbones a little protruding and large ears whose tips protruded over his manner. The skin had an ivory-colored sheen. It must have been mongrel. She had never seen except some corpse of some small troll to any extraordinary creature of great and varied that was the world. As little else could discover and were only speculations, the young woman decided to sleep a few hours too. At sunset Gosberg woke up. Despite his protests, Arian examined his wound. It was surprising was very well, the stitches were almost completely healed. Ordoni went up to tell them that everything had gone as Gosberg's wish, the corpses well hidden, no one would miss them in a few days. The mule and provisions were also available, and the best news, the Smugglers' Guild had accepted in exchange for the gold from the bag that they used the Shadow Passage. They would count as a guide one of the most expert smugglers. They would leave at dusk during the changing of the guard. That was when it was agreed that smugglers could do their business. Ordoni brought them something for dinner and they ate greedily. Then they gathered their things and prepared for the trip. They went down to the basement of the inn. It was a huge place, where the mule and the guide were waiting for them. The foundations of this building are very old, the innkeeper told them. Dating from the first era, all Xeres is full of caves, some natural and others artificial, but few know of its existence, as it is a very useful secret for our business. The three companions followed Ordoni through well-constructed and paved passageways. Here we are in the eastern part of Xeres. We are in the domain of the Smugglers' Guild, of which you are its Grand Master, added Gosberg. Ordoni remained silent and a cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He tried to continue as if that sentence had not been said. They saw how a figure appeared guiding a mule. We are under the forests of the Temple of the Sun. This is Zia, your guide with your provisions. Perfect, my dear Ordoni. You have done what I have asked you very effectively. Gosberg was satisfied. Thank you, my lord. Your reward. Everyone was silent. Ordoni expected something that Gosberg did not intend to give him for good. This. What is my reward, sir? Stay alive. Everyone was stunned at the phrase of the Denka. Leave before I change my mind. Gosberg added a sly smile and stared at the innkeeper. Ordoni disappeared between the passages of the Passage of Shadows quickly and without looking back. Zia was a very useful guide in the tunnels. There were hundreds of them that branched throughout the region, so he told them his guide some descended to the kingdom of the depths where some incredible beings dwelt that according to the legends were said to be older than the elves. But nobody has ventured into those tunnels for many centuries, or if someone has descended has not returned. After 6 hours they went out through a natural cave to a forest south of Xeres and near the mountains of the Lost King. Zia had fulfilled his mission, but gave them the following advice. Go along the roads that border the mountains, they are the least traveled. The royal guard is concentrated on the main road and the northern border. Once you cross the Aguafria River you can follow the north road safely until you reach Tame. Beware of bandits in this area. They are dangerous and ruthless. The trio said goodbye to Zia and headed towards a long journey south. Arian had harbored doubts about the Denka's escape plan, but so far everything had gone according to plan. During the first day of the trip they barely made a brief stop. because Gosberg wanted to get away from Xeres as soon as possible, and it was not until late at night when they stopped to rest in the hollow of a huge oak tree. Agnorok prepared a small campfire, discovered with great pleasure the denkka that Ordoni had prepared for them, field bread, which was a stale bread rich in cereals that soldiers and smugglers ate in the course of their usual chores, as well as nuts, cheese, and a little wine. They dined around a small bonfire, Arion and Gosberg near the fire and Agnorok a little further removed next to the mule, which they baptized as Kiona. Arion fell asleep watching the half-orc clean his sword under the starry sky. Agnorok stood guard while his companions fell asleep. The half-orc closed his eyes and gave thanks to anything for still living in spite of everything. He thought again of that legend that his father had told him on a similar night and that he had never heard or read again, the chosen one of the gods. He was overcome by exhaustion and fell asleep. The next morning they had to undertake a long journey.